Get a girl. What is going on, IK fam? It is your boy, BN, Mr. Kingdom Builder, OM Jizzle Ali Bizzle. I cannot wait to talk about what we're going to be discussing today. This is such a passionate topic for me, and anytime I see these conversations on the IK Discord, if I see these things in Kingdom Chat, these are fantastic pieces of knowledge, of information, and an opportunity to educate players who may not know these things when they happen or when they come up. So before we dive into this, as always, make sure you guys sub to the channel, smash that like button to give us a thumbs up, and as always, ring that notification bell so you can get updates when we have new content coming out. Okay, what are we talking about, boss, today? We are going to be discussing a question that Fate here from S48 on the questions channel of the IK Discord mentioned, or I should say asked, where he said he's in S48. Some players from S37 jump to their server and say we should not use shields to PvP. Even provided a kind picture here of some people. He says they complain about using shields, about how they use shields. I want to ask other server players, is using shield normal, a strat tactic, a rule break? And then you have some people that responded, right? You have BRR here, says it depends on server rules. He says that in their server they don't use shields in normal days and only kill once, but he says, but if they jump to your server and your server has rules, they should agree with the rules you have. Says they can't force you to take a shield out or give you threats, etc. Sono says it's a tactic as long as you have a pawn doing rallies. He says in case I ever, he's like, no, why, in case I ever decide to jump there. Okay, fantastic. Right, and then they kind of go on a little bit. He says next COR is free for all, fourth COR, come. So what I really want to focus on here is what I think to be the most important part of this topic is that when you're going to a new server and you are a player, you are a group, I'm going to give you guys a little story time lesson here as well. But before we dive in there, what I want to say is, and this is just a common denominator, right, that is a standard I hope every player, right, with good intentions, I should say, would abide by, is that when you are going to a new server that you're migrating to out of yours, keep in mind that when you're going there, right, you should always, even before that, right, before you even decide to migrate, you need to reach out to people there if it's a server you really are interested in going to. And you should ask them, how are they setting up their server? Right? What are the rules? What are the policies? What are the do's and don'ts? Keep in mind, this is for the players with good intentions. The ones with ill intentions, of course, they probably don't care. They're just going to, they'll migrate to whatever server they want to and do whatever they want, right? There's not really any expectations there. But again, by saying this, it's very important. Now, and again, that's because by finding out what those rules and policies are, allow for you to operate within the bounds of how that server is set up. Now, let me give you a little story time lesson here on how I'm going to hammer this point home even more. So I'm going to give you an example of a little history lesson of what I experienced myself in my very first project. My very first jump project that I ran in Rock. And for some of you that might watch my content, you may know this if you were around during that time. But we ran our first project in 1904. And we had, I think, about 8 or 9 alliances to start. We branched and kind of built that up to about, I think we had almost 14 or 15 at one point as we kind of went into the first few weeks. But the reason I say this is because and again, this is arguably probably one of my bigger, if not my biggest project that I ran, where we had about 450 people that made it all the way with us to Final Kingdom. The Kingdom was going so well when it came to progression, when it came to us being unified in a lot of cooperative areas, and players were able to freely develop to the maximum way that they could for the best investment or the best return. And there was a time where we were doing a lot of heavy recruiting, migration recruitment for other servers that were plus or minus within our KVK bracket of eight kingdoms, and then we were also doing it beyond that as well. We came across a group that was interested in migrating to our server, and during this time we were going through kind of a discussion, a conversation period, where we were giving them information because they had reps from the two alliances that were interested in coming, and even though nothing had been agreed to yet, we were still kind of in the discussing phase and kind of talking about what options would be, right? There wasn't us saying, yeah, okay, we'd love for you to come over, come on, right? There was nothing like that. But what ended up happening was that the two groups basically were told by their reps they can come over. So it was kind of like this blitzkrieg, if you will, of a bunch of players now coming over, and then all of a sudden their leads or their reps are, demanding / asking for shells to be provided. And with that happening, being kind of naive and a little more gullible in the beginning, right? Because we just assumed, these people don't have any ill intentions. If they're coming over, we've explained to them, even though we didn't agree to anything, we at least explained to them what the server rules, what the kingdom rules were, what the policies were, how we went about, what our hierarchy structure is, how we ran our council, everything was explained to them. And then the assumption from there, the hope / assumption, is that those representatives are then communicating that information to their officer team, to their players, so everyone has realistic expectations of what they're going into or migrating into. And the result is that, okay, if these people are coming over, they must agree with how we're managing, with how we're running the server or the kingdom, and they want to be a part of it. Because, why would we think anything else? That wouldn't make any sense. Why would you even assign a migration rep and ask us all these questions if you're not going to tell all your players about the information? That goes for any kingdom builder. And so the two alliances came over, and we, even though, like I said, they came over without letting us know that they were, we still provided them with 2 premium shells for alliances, where we gave them access to, I think it was 1/3 to 1/2 of the territory in each Zone 1 province, right, with allocated shrines and altars, altars and sanctums. It's been a while since I played, and then we gave them land, right, and developed alliance shells that we had been working on since day one, right, and the asterisk here is that we handed over R5. When looking back on it in hindsight, right, I would never do that again, right? I would never hand over leadership of an alliance to someone I didn't know, right, or to someone that one of my trusted leads couldn't vouch for. And I say that because there always has to be a probation period. Now, I'll cover this probably in another video in greater detail, but I at least wanted to briefly talk about the importance of what Fate is talking about, right, when it comes to players / alliances that are coming over to your server, or to at least the server you or others play in. And the important part here to take away is that it's good. Now, again, you can't stop some people from coming over. Mainly because you have a 1 million migration cap. You can't set it any lower than that currently. And because of that, you could still have people that are under a mil lord power that come in. But if there are groups that are coming in Fate's situation where they are telling them that they shouldn't do certain things, right? They don't, most likely based on that, right, we can hypothesize that these players, if not some of their players, that came into their server do not know what the rules are, right? And who knows if they have rules, right? Maybe they're just telling them, hey, don't use shields when we're PvPing. I mean, Obviously, the stronger person wouldn't want the weaker person using a shield when they're PvPing because they want to attack you. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. From that, again, the simple common denominator here is that there needs to be respect for when you are going into another server. Right? That means you do your research, you do your due diligence, right? Again, for the good intended and good intentioned players or groups that are going to a server because they're actually researching properly. Again, for the other side of it, right, the ill-intended players that just don't care, the people that want war, or they're just going to go and wreak havoc, right? I mean, it's kind of two sides of a coin, right? You're not really getting anything in between. For those players, right, it doesn't really matter because they're just going to do whatever they want anyways, right? And it's kind of like you just essentially have to be prepared to deal with that if at all they come into your server once migration opens at 90 days. So in short, to answer Fate's question here, in the event that he watches this video, is that again, if these players were rogues, or if they just came in and you had no idea, or leadership in your server 48 didn't tell you guys that people were coming in, and these players are just asking you or telling you shouldn't use, again, you don't have to do that at all if it's just people. Again, if it's not a rule of your server, or if it's not a rule that the majority controlling group has set, then you can play however you want, in short. But I at least hope me giving you a little bit of a history lesson here on a situation that happened to us at least provided a little additional context, because what ended up happening at the end is that these players that came to 1904, right, some of them, including some of their leadership, started talking about how they didn't like the rules that we had set up. Keep in mind, in the server that they came to, because they had to leave their other server, essentially from a rampaging whale, and for any ulterior or additional reasons. But the fact is they chose to leave the server they're in, partly because they were forced, but it was still the choice at the end of the day, just as much as you can choose wherever you want to go. You didn't have to come to our server, you could have went to any server. But when you choose to go to a server, and even more so, you choose to open up diplomacy dialogue, or just dialogue with the leaders of that kingdom, and you are interested in migrating there should be a level of respect that you have going in. And keep in mind, right, it's funny because I remember this so distinctly. The example that I had actually tried to give the alliance leads back then was, it's kind of like when you're going and visiting someone's house, right? You're going in there not as a visitor, but it's the concept of the respect portion. That's what we're really hitting on. When you are going somewhere else that is not your own, you are usually going to be cognizantly aware of your surroundings and where you're going into. If you walk into a police station, you're not going to sit there making threats or using gun hand signs or doing anything that wouldn't be construed as civil conduct, right? If you go, let's say you go and you travel internationally and you go to another country or you go to another state, some of their rules and laws are going to be different, right? Does that mean that you're just not going to abide by them and you're just going to do what you do or what you're used to from where you come from? I mean, maybe some of that will work, but maybe some of it won't. So you have to be aware that it's very similar. When you're going into another server or kingdom that is organized, it is good to be aware of how that server or kingdom is managing and what their expectations are, what their policies are, what their rules are, what their standards are, and you should be going in there with a level of respect for that and not necessarily looking to change that. That was one of the big unfortunate parts for us in 04 when we had two groups that came in, is some of the players and some of the leadership basically just started talking about how they didn't like the rules. They felt that things could be done better, and it almost felt like they came into the server it almost feels like they came into the server and then some of them had ulterior motives to undermine the foundation that we had spent so much time preparing and building only so they could just run things themselves, or as I think some of them said at one point, right, have a say. But really, the challenge is that when you're one of those people who says, "Oh, we just want to have a say, we want to have a voice," more than likely it's really just you saying that you want to run things. And more often than not, it's actually better just to take a wait and see approach, right? When it's like they say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And it doesn't mean that improvements can't be made. But it also means that at the same time, when you're going somewhere new, sometimes it's good just to listen and learn, right? To just take in information and see how things are done. The challenge with some players is that when they go into a completely different system, into a new server or a new kingdom, that is not something they're used to. Sometimes some of those players will be vocal about it. Right? This isn't how we do things in our server. This isn't how we do things in our kingdom. Right? The way we do it in this area is better than the way you guys do it here. You should change it. When there could be nothing inherently wrong with the way a current system is set up in a server, but some people are just very outspoken and very vocal about it. So anyways, again, kind of went off on somewhat of a tangent, but I do hope that any of you that have stayed this long appreciate the thought process going along here, and again, answering Fate's question. I just thought this was a fantastic opportunity for a really good topic. These are the kind of things I love talking about because it directly comes right back into server management, kingdom management, right, and all the areas that go into it, and really how dynamic just managing a kingdom or server really is, because there's just so many moving parts that go into it, being this one that we're talking about, which is incoming players or groups that are coming in and just having respect for the way that your server or kingdom is set up initially. What I would love to ask for any of you is, have you found yourself in a situation where you've played in a server or a kingdom before, in any kingdom builder, or even in IK as of now, where you've come across a group or even players that came in and they kind of showed you, or they gave you the impression that they were on board, and then it just went south and they had ulterior motives? I would love to know if you're someone who's came across a similar situation like that. What exactly happened? Let me know in the comments down below. That is it for me. Until next time, we will catch you guys later.